You think this is funny? Roman Bellacorte's voice didn't rise. It dropped cold surgical final. His arm was still locked around Isabella's waist. Her body pulled hard against his chest, the broken champagne glass glittering 2 inches from where she would have fallen. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Natalie Whitman, who had just watched a plus-size banquet manager get deliberately tripped in front of 200 people, and smiled. The orchestra died mid-note. Forks stopped moving. Philadelphia's most powerful men and women forgot how to breathe. Roman Bellacorte, the man no one touched, was holding her, and he was not letting go. Subscribe to our channel right now and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Stay with us all the way to the end. Isabella Hart had been invisible for so long that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Not because she was small. Isabella was the furthest thing from small at 5'7", with a full figure that filled every room she entered. She was physically impossible to miss. But there was a particular kind of invisibility that had nothing to do with size, and everything to do with how long you'd allowed other people to treat you like furniture. Useful, functional, easily replaced, present only when someone needed something moved. She'd been managing banquet operations at the Crown Meridian Hotel for 6 years. 6 years of 16-hour days of memorizing every dietary restriction and seating preference for guests who would never remember her name. 6 years of preventing disasters that the guests never knew had nearly happened, of rearranging timelines in real time, of talking suppliers back from the edge. When deliveries ran 3 hours late, of coaching terrified young servers through their first black tie events with a calm she sometimes had to manufacture from nothing. 6 years of watching Charles Whitman collect awards for events she had built from the floor up. She was 30 years old and she was very, very good at her job. She was also, according to Charles Whitman's casual cruelty, exactly the kind of woman who should remain invisible, which in his language meant behind the scenes, away from the important guests, never positioned where her figure might remind anyone that not everyone at the Crown Meridian looked like a magazine cover. He had actually said that to her once. Not shouted it, not whispered it with shame. Said it the way someone states a weather forecast matter-of-factly, as though cruelty delivered in a measured tone somehow became management wisdom. Someone with your presentation would make certain guests uncomfortable, he'd said, reviewing the gala seating chart 6 months ago. Keep yourself to coordination. You're better behind the scenes anyway. Isabella had written it down that night in the small notebook she kept in her nightstand. Not out of self-pity. She'd long since learned that self-pity was a luxury she couldn't afford. She wrote it down because she was building a record, and she was not entirely sure yet what she planned to do with it. Tonight was the Founders Relief Gala, the most important event on the Crown Meridian's annual calendar, and by significant margin, the most complex logistical challenge Isabella managed each year. 214 confirmed guests spanning 3 categories that could not be allowed to collide: Philadelphia's political establishment, its legitimate corporate elite, and the layer of powerful families whose business interests were best described in court documents as alleged. Isabella had memorized the seating chart the way a general memorizes a battlefield. She knew that Senator Hartwell's chief of staff needed to be kept away from the media table after last year's incident. She knew that the Devereux family's matriarch required a chair with arms and would be deeply offended if she received one of the standard ballroom seats instead. She knew that the floral centerpieces on tables 9 through 12 were half an inch too tall and would obstruct sightlines during the keynote speech, a problem she had identified that afternoon and corrected without telling anyone, because there was no point in announcing a problem she'd already solved. And she knew that table 1, the single most significant table in the room, belonged to Roman Bellacorte. She had studied his file the same way she studied every important guest. Not out of fear, though fear would have been a completely reasonable response. Roman Bellacorte was 40 years old, the head of the Bellacorte organization, publicly described as a real estate developer and shipping magnate, privately understood by everyone in Philadelphia who paid any attention to anything to be the man who had inherited his family's criminal empire after his older brother Marco was murdered 7 years ago. What the file didn't capture, what no file ever captured, was the particular quality of silence that preceded Roman Bellacorte wherever he went. Isabella had watched him arrive from the corridor near the service entrance where she always positioned herself during initial seating. He'd moved through the ballroom's entrance like gravity moving through a room. People shifted without knowing why. Conversations faltered, shoulders tightened. His security team was invisible in the way that truly professional security was always invisible, but their presence registered somewhere below conscious thought. Roman himself was unremarkable to look at, if you weren't paying attention. Dark suit, no jewelry except a simple watch. Dark hair threaded with gray at the temples. He was not physically imposing in the way that cheap crime dramas required villains to be imposing. He was simply someone whom your instincts recognized as dangerous before your brain had finished processing the observation. Isabella's instincts recognized it. She filed the information and returned to work. At 7:45, the cocktail reception transitioned to dinner service, and Isabella's world accelerated into the particular controlled chaos that she privately loved and publicly made look effortless. She was tracking 14 simultaneous variables, the timing of the first course. A server who had gone pale and needed to be pulled from the floor before she fainted, a microphone feedback issue in the left speaker cluster that the audio team had just radioed her about, and a situation at table 7 involving spilled red wine and a woman in ivory silk who was 3 seconds from making a scene. Isabella handled all of it in 11 minutes without raising her voice once. She was crossing towards the service corridor when she saw Natalie Whitman. Natalie was 26, Charles's only daughter, and present tonight, the way decorative objects were present for display, contributing nothing functional, absorbing attention she hadn't earned. She had her father's ability to weaponize casual cruelty, and her mother's talent for performing social grace while deploying it. She was standing with a cluster of young women near the edge of the dining floor, holding a champagne flute, with the relaxed confidence of someone who had never once worried about paying for anything. Isabella needed to cross through that section of the floor to reach the service corridor. She had done the calculation going around the long way would cost her 4 minutes, and she didn't have 4 minutes to spare. She moved through precisely and efficiently, angling her body to minimize the space. She took up the way she had learned to do over years of navigating rooms where her size was treated as an inconvenience. "Oh, excuse you," Natalie said. Isabella stopped. "I apologize if I crowded your space. I'm just passing through." Crowded. Natalie said the word the way someone tastes something unpleasant. She turned to her companions with the lazy smile of someone who has identified easy sport. "I think the word she means is taking up the entire aisle." The women around Natalie laughed, a careful social laugh, the kind that says, "I'm not the one doing this, I'm just appreciating it." "I'll be out of your way in a moment," Isabella said. Her voice was level, her hands were still. She had done this before many times, many versions of this exact exchange, and she had learned that stillness was its own kind of armor. The event staff really should be more careful about who they hire. Natalie continued loud enough now that the nearest tables could hear. "Some of us paid a great deal of money to be here tonight, and having to navigate around—" She gestured vaguely at Isabella's body. "Whatever this is, it rather defeats the purpose of a high-end venue." Isabella felt the familiar pressure behind her sternum, the compressed heat of swallowed anger. She recognized it the way you recognize an old injury, not surprising, just painful. "If there's a concern about the event experience," Isabella said, "I'd encourage you to direct that to hotel management after the evening concludes. Have a lovely dinner, Miss Whitman." She turned and took 3 steps, and then her heel caught. She didn't understand what had happened at first. Only that one moment she was walking, and the next her balance was gone. Her body pitching forward toward the edge of the nearest table, toward the broken stem of the champagne flute that one of the servers hadn't finished clearing toward the floor at a speed and angle that her brain registered with the particular clarity of incoming disaster. She had a fraction of a second to understand that she was going to fall badly, and she was going to fall in front of 200 people, and the broken glass was going to. An arm caught her. Not a tentative grab, not the panicked clutch of someone trying to prevent an accident and landing awkwardly. A full deliberate catch, a man's arm around her waist, solid and certain, pulling her backward and sideways in a single motion that stopped her fall completely and left her seated, alive, safe, on Roman Bellacorte's lap. The orchestra didn't stop all at once. It stumbled the way an orchestra stumbles when the musicians are distracted, rather than following a conductor's cue, and then it simply trailed into silence, one instrument at a time, until the only sound in the Crown Meridian's grand ballroom was the soft hiss of the air system, and 200 people making absolutely no noise whatsoever. Isabella became aware of several things simultaneously. Roman Bellacorte's arm was still around her waist, not gripping, supporting. There was a distinction she registered with odd precision. His other hand had come up to steady her shoulder, and both were completely still now, waiting. His chest was solid against her back. His breathing was even. And every single person in that ballroom was staring. The heat that hit Isabella's face was so intense, she felt dizzy. She had spent 6 years learning to disappear. 6 years, mastering the art of taking up exactly the right amount of space. Not too much, never too much. And now she was occupying the lap of the most feared man in Philadelphia, while 200 people held their collective breath and watched. "I'm so sorry," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended. "I can stand." "Not yet." His voice was low. Not commanding exactly. More like someone delivering information that had been carefully considered. "There's broken glass near your right foot. Wait." She waited. She was acutely conscious of her weight, the familiar, cruel calculation she had been running her whole adult life. The voice that said, "You are too much. You take up too much. You are in someone else's space, and you should be smaller." Roman Bellacorte was not shifting beneath her. He was not adjusting his posture with the subtle discomfort of a man trying to manage the physical reality of a heavier woman. He was simply sitting, holding her steady, waiting for it to be safe for her to move. One of his security team appeared from somewhere to the left. How they moved that fast, and that silently, was a question Isabella's brain offered, and then immediately discarded, and crouched to remove the broken glass from the floor. "Clear," the man said quietly. Roman looked past Isabella then, not at the crowd, not at the security team. He looked directly at Natalie Whitman, who had gone the color of old ivory, and he said in a voice that carried perfectly through the ballroom's silence, "I watched you catch her heel with your shoe." Natalie's mouth opened, closed. She just lost her balance." "I watched you," Roman said again, with a patience that was somehow more frightening than anger. "My security camera watched you. The footage is already saved." He paused. "You will apologize to her. Now. In front of everyone you just humiliated her in front of." "Roman." Isabella said his name without meaning, to the reflex of someone who has always fought her own battles and never known what to do when someone fought one beside her. He looked at her for the first time. He had dark eyes. She registered not the dramatic darkness of fiction, but the particular depth of someone who had learned very young to show less than they felt. "Can you stand?" he asked. "Yes, of course I can stand." "Then stand, and I'll still ask for your apology." She stood. Pain shot through her right ankle immediately, sharp, insistent, distinctly worse than a simple stumble should have produced. She kept her face neutral through it, because that was what you did when 200 people were looking at you, and because she would not give Natalie Whitman the satisfaction of seeing it. "Are you hurt?" Roman asked. "I'm fine." "Your ankle disagrees with you." She looked down. She hadn't noticed herself shifting her weight, but apparently he had. "I'll have Dr. Mancini look at it," Roman said, nodding briefly towards someone at his table, a compact man in his 50s, who was already rising. "He's discreet." "That's not necessary." "It may be nothing," Roman said. "Or it may not be. You'll know in 5 minutes either way." It was not a command, she realized. It was the kind of statement that simply didn't entertain alternatives. There was a difference. Natalie had gathered herself. The color was returning to her face, and with it, the particular armor of a woman who has never experienced a consequence she couldn't buy her way out of. "This is absurd," she said. "I'm sure it was an accident." "Your shoe moved 2 inches to the left to catch her heel," Roman said, still with that same terrible patience. "The camera has the resolution. People trip at events." "Natalie." A new voice cut through the ballroom from the opposite direction. Charles Whitman moved through the crowd with the practiced authority of a man who has run a room for many years. He was 54, silver-haired, wearing the comfortable confidence of someone who has never had to consider whether he belonged somewhere. He looked at Roman with the smile of a man who is managing a situation and believes he is succeeding at it. "Mr. Bellacorte, I cannot apologize enough for this disruption," Charles said smoothly. "I assure you this kind of incident is not reflective of the Crown Meridian's standard of service." He barely glanced at Isabella. "Ms. Hart, you can step back to the service area. I'll handle this." Isabella felt the familiar reflex, the yes of course, the stepping backward, the making herself smaller. She did not step back. "There's nothing to handle," she said clearly. "Miss Whitman tripped me. Mr. Bellacorte saw it. If you'd like to review the camera footage—" "Isabella." Charles's voice shifted just slightly, just enough to carry a warning. "This is not the time or the place for footage," Roman said. Charles turned. "I beg your pardon. Your daughter tripped my guest's employee. I have the footage. I'm suggesting we review it before anyone decides what happened." "Your guest's employee." Isabella registered the phrasing. She wasn't sure yet what to make of it. Charles's smile didn't falter. It was one of his great skills keeping the smile present while the calculation behind it shifted. Of course we'll review it. I'm sure this was a misunderstanding. But in the meantime," he turned to Isabella with an expression that was almost kind. "Perhaps you should take the rest of the evening. You've clearly had a shock. I'll have someone cover the remainder of your duties." Isabella looked at him. She had spent 6 years reading between Charles Whitman's lines. She was very good at it. What he had just said was, disappear. Now, before this gets any bigger. "I have a portfolio to deliver to Table 1, she said. "And I have 3 service sequences to coordinate in the next 40 minutes. I'll rest my ankle when the event concludes." Charles's smile went thinner. "Isabella." "Let her work," Roman said. It was 4 words. Roman delivered them without inflection, without visible emotion, without any of the theatrical weight of a man accustomed to having his instructions followed. Every captain at Table 1 went absolutely still. Charles Whitman went still. The nearest 20 tables worth of guests, who had been pretending not to listen, while listening to every syllable, held their breath. "She has work to do," Roman continued. "And I believe you have a conversation with your daughter that needs to happen before this evening proceeds further." Charles looked at Roman for a long moment. Isabella watched him do the calculation, the one she had watched him do 1,000 times in 6 years, the one where he weighed the power of the person he was facing against the cost of backing down. Charles Whitman stepped back. "Natalie," he said. "Come." Natalie Whitman did not apologize. She gathered her clutch and followed her father toward the corridor, with her chin at an angle that suggested she was the injured party, and Isabella watched them go and understood with cold clarity that this was not finished. Dr. Mancini, Roman's physician, who had the brisk efficiency of someone who had treated emergencies in less accommodating environments, examined her ankle in the service corridor with a portable kit, and the particular professionalism of someone who does not ask questions they don't need the answers to. "Minor sprain," he said. "Significant enough to swell by morning, manageable tonight if you tape it and take weight off it when you can. Which," he glanced at her expression, "you won't. I have 3 more hours of an event to run." "I know, the tape will help." He produced a compression bandage from somewhere and applied it with practiced efficiency. "The gentleman asked me to mention that there's a chair at his table any time you need it." Isabella stared at him. "He said to say it exactly like that," Dr. Mancini added with the faint trace of someone who has worked for Roman Bellacorte long enough to stop being surprised. His words were, "Tell her there's a chair, and she can use it or not use it as she sees fit, but I want her to know it's there." Isabella returned to the ballroom. She coordinated the second course service. She managed a situation at Table 15 involving competing dietary claims and a very determined vegetarian. She spoke quietly to her floor supervisor about the server who'd gone pale earlier and was pleased to learn the girl had eaten something in the break room and was feeling steadier. She checked the audio situation, which had been resolved, and confirmed the keynote timing with the events director and reviewed the dessert staging in the kitchen. And every time she passed near Table 1, the chair beside Roman Bellacorte was empty. She did not sit in it. She was working. She had always been working. That was the thing about being indispensable, you never got to stop. But she noticed it. At 9:15 she picked up the confidential portfolio from the events office and carried it toward table 1. This was the part of the evening she had been both managing toward and quietly dreading. The portfolio contained signed copies of the gala's charitable commitment agreements, and it was supposed to go to Charles Whitman for presentation during the keynote. Except Isabella had been noticing things about the portfolio for 3 weeks. The kind of noticing that starts as a small irregularity and grows into something you can't unknow. She had flagged 3 invoices to Charles in early September and been told they were third-party vendor contracts above her clearance level. She had flagged 2 more in October and been told the same thing. She had made copies of all 5 because Isabella Hart had been invisible long enough to know that documentation was the only protection available to people like her. The portfolio's charitable commitment figures didn't match the hotel's operational accounts. The gap was small enough to miss if you weren't specifically looking. Isabella had been specifically looking for 4 months. The portfolio was supposed to go to Charles. Isabella stood outside table 1 and made a decision she'd been building toward for 4 months. She approached Roman Bellacorte's table instead. His security team tracked her movement. She felt it the way you feel a shift in weather, not heard, just registered. Roman looked up when she reached the table. This close, she was conscious of something she hadn't been able to assess from across the ballroom. Roman Bellacorte was paying complete attention to her. Not the partial attention of a powerful man granting an audience, all of it. "The portfolio," she said. "I need to tell you something about it before I hand it over." "Then sit," Roman said, "and tell me." She sat in the empty chair beside him. Around the table, 3 of his captains shifted with the subtle unease of men who weren't certain their boss had just made the right decision. Isabella opened the portfolio across her knees and began to speak. She had not prepared a speech. She had never imagined she would be delivering this information to Roman Bellacorte at his own gala table, so there had been no opportunity to script it. What came out was simply what she knew: the specific invoices, the specific dates, the specific discrepancy pattern she had tracked across 14 months of operational accounts. "Total fraudulent billing to the charity account," she said, "as far as I can reconstruct from what I have access to, is approximately $3.8 million. Roman was very still. "And the vendor codes on these invoices," she continued, turning to the 3rd page, "aren't Crown Meridian vendor codes. They're from a separate system. I ran the company registration numbers against public records last week. 2 of the 5 companies don't appear to exist. The other 3 are registered to a holding company called Serrano Meridian Properties." The silence at table 1 had a different quality than the silence from earlier. That silence had been public, theatrical, the held breath of an audience. This silence was private, and it had an edge to it. "Say that name again," Roman said. Isabella said it again. One of his captains, a man with a jaw like a shipyard and the stillness of someone who has spent his career waiting to be needed, stood up and walked away from the table without being told to. Roman looked at her for a long moment. His expression hadn't changed, but Isabella, who had spent her entire career learning to read the small signals in faces that were working hard not to reveal anything, registered something beneath the stillness. Not surprise exactly. Something more like confirmation. "You've known about this for how long?" he asked. 4 months, since I first noticed the invoice irregularities." "You reported it to Whitman." He shut it down. "But you kept copies." "I kept copies." Roman was quiet. Then, "Why are you bringing this to me instead of taking it to an accountant or a lawyer?" Isabella looked at him directly. "Because the billing started 6 weeks after your organization announced its involvement in the gala," she said. "And because whoever set this up needed access to both the hotel's charitable accounts and your organization's financial commitments, which means someone trusted by both sides built this. And because if I take this to an accountant, the accountant goes to Charles, and Charles makes the copies disappear and fires me. And because..." She paused, and this was the part she had not planned to say, but it came out anyway. "I have worked here for 6 years, and I have watched that man take credit for everything I built, and I am not willing to let him take $3.8 million from a charity that serves families who actually need it. Roman looked at her for what felt like a very long time. "You're not afraid of me," he said finally. It was not a question. "I've been afraid of things my whole life," Isabella said. "I've been afraid of losing my job, afraid of taking up too much space, afraid of what Charles would do if I pushed back. Those fears have had 6 years to make me very small." She looked at him steadily. "You haven't done anything to make me afraid of you tonight. I've done plenty of things in my life that would justify the fear. I'm sure you have. But right now in this room, you're the only person who saw what Natalie did and said something about it out loud." She paused. "That matters." Something shifted in Roman Bellacorte's expression. It happened quickly, and he contained it quickly, but it happened. A small involuntary softening around the jaw, the face of someone who has not in some time had anything said to them that registered as genuinely new information. "Mr. Bellacorte." The voice came from behind Isabella Charles Whitman, approaching from the left with the particular energy of a man who has recognized a threat and is moving to neutralize it. "I must apologize again for the earlier unpleasantness. I also need to speak with Ms. Hart about her duties for the remainder of the evening." He looked at Isabella with an expression that was perfectly calibrated concerned disappointment, the face of a mentor whose employee has let him down. "Isabella, this isn't your table. Mr. Bellacorte and his guests have a private business discussion to complete, and I believe you have service coordination to attend to." "She's finishing a conversation," Roman said. "I understand, but—" "With me," Roman said. "She's finishing a conversation with me." Charles stopped. The smile stayed, but it tightened. "Of course," he said. "I'll wait." "You don't need to wait," Roman said. "She'll come to you when she's finished, or she won't. Either way, the conversation she's having right now is more important." Isabella watched Charles Whitman's face cycle through 3 emotions in rapid succession: calculation fury and the specific kind of managed fear that appears in people who have just realized the power structure has shifted, and they were the last to know. "The portfolio," Charles said carefully. "That's internal hotel documentation. It should be in my hands," Roman said, "since the billing irregularities in it involve funds committed by my organization." "Yes." He let a brief silence settle. "Thank you for pointing that out." Charles was silent for 4 seconds. "I see." "I know," Roman said. Charles Whitman left. Isabella let out a breath she had been holding for what felt like several minutes. "He's going to fire me," she said. Not with self-pity, simply as an operational assessment. "He may," Roman agreed. "Do you want to stop him, or would you like me to?" "I want to stop him myself," Isabella said immediately. Roman's expression shifted again, that same small contained thing that had appeared before. "Then let's make sure you have everything you need to do that." At 9:47, during the keynote speech, financial investigators arrived at the Crown Meridian Hotel. They had been called, Isabella would later learn, by Roman's attorney, to whom Roman had transmitted the portfolio's contents 14 minutes earlier via a secure channel, while Isabella coordinated the transition to dessert service. At 9:52, Charles Whitman was escorted from the building. At 10:03, Natalie Whitman, who had returned to the ballroom after her argument with her father and had been watching Isabella with an expression that oscillated between rage and something close to fear, stood up and left without being escorted anywhere. Isabella stood at the edge of the service corridor, watching the financial investigators work, and felt the particular exhaustion of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has just been allowed to set it down. "You didn't have to stay out here," Roman said. She hadn't heard him approach. That surprised her. She had excellent peripheral awareness, sharpened by years of tracking a moving ballroom. He moved very quietly for a man of his size. "The event isn't finished," she said. "The event is finished," he said. "Just not the cleanup." She looked at him. "Was any of tonight—" She stopped, reorganizing the question. "Did you know about the invoices before tonight?" "I suspected the hotel's accounts were being used," Roman said. "I didn't know by whom or to what degree. I've been watching the gala operations for 2 months trying to identify the source." A pause. "You were the only member of the hotel staff who flagged the discrepancies internally." Charles shut it down. Charles shut it down. But you were watching, and you were keeping copies, and tonight you brought them to the right table. He looked at her steadily. I want to offer you a position. Isabella stared at him. The Bellacorte Regent, Roman said. It's been underperforming for 3 years. I'm losing money, the staff are demoralized, and the last 2 operations directors lasted 8 months combined. I think the problem is that neither of them actually knew how to run a hotel. You clearly do. He paused. Operations director, whatever you need to make it work. You just watched me get tripped by a guest's daughter and fall onto your lap in front of your entire business network, Isabella said. I watched you manage a 200-person gala with a staff problem, an audio problem, a budget discrepancy, and an ankle injury without losing a single service beat, Roman said. And I watched you walk to my table with evidence that took you 4 months of quiet, careful work to compile and deliver it to me clearly and specifically, even though you had no particular reason to trust that I'd do anything useful with it. He paused. That's not someone who falls. That's someone who was pushed. Isabella was quiet for a moment. The Regent's staff, she said. If I come in and the hotel is failing, what happens to them? They keep their positions until the operation stabilizes enough to know what's needed. In writing. Roman looked at her. In writing, he agreed. I want access to the full operational accounts, not summaries, full access. You'll have it. And I want independent legal representation before I sign anything. Not your lawyers, mine. Something that might, in better light, and from a different angle, have been a smile appeared briefly on Roman Bellacorte's face. I'll have my office contact you tomorrow. I haven't said yes. I know, Roman said. You'll think about it tonight, and you'll ask 3 more questions tomorrow, and you'll say yes, because the staff will lose their jobs if the Regent closes, and you don't like the idea of that any more than I do. Isabella looked at him for a long moment. I might say no just to prove you wrong, she said. That, Roman said, is something I'd actually look forward to. She looked across the ballroom at the dispersing guests, the investigators, the servers who were still methodically clearing tables because someone had told them to keep working, and they were too professional to stop. Her staff, her event, her 6 years. Mr. Bellacorte, she said. Roman. She didn't use his name, not yet. Catching me once doesn't give you the right to decide where I belong. He looked at her directly. No, he said simply. It doesn't. Then I'll call your office tomorrow. She walked back toward her team, her ankle aching. Her hands steady, the particular weight she had been carrying for 4 months, gone from her chest, replaced by something she did not yet have a name for. Behind her, Roman Bellacorte watched her go, and for the first time in longer than he could precisely remember, he was the one left wondering what happened next. The pain in Isabella's ankle was getting worse. She knew it, the way you know a storm is coming. Before the sky changes, a deep insistent throb that her body kept sending upward and her brain kept dismissing, because there were still 67 guests who hadn't received their dessert course, and the keynote microphone needed a final sound check, and 3 of her servers were visibly shaken by what had happened near table 1, and needed someone to steady them before the evening's second half began. She was that someone. She had always been that someone. So she moved. Carefully, efficiently, with her weight shifted slightly to her left foot, in a way she hoped no one noticed, and she worked the floor. The way she had worked it for 6 years, reading the room, adjusting, solving, smoothing. And she did not think about Roman Bellacorte, or his empty chair, or the particular way he had looked at her when she said, catching me once doesn't give you the right to decide where I belong. She thought about the dessert course. She thought about the microphone. She thought about her servers. She was very good at thinking about the work. It was her floor supervisor, Marcus, who finally stopped her near the kitchen corridor at 10:15. Marcus had worked under Isabella for 4 years, and he had the particular loyalty of someone who has been treated decently by exactly one manager in a long career and has never forgotten it. Isabella, he said quietly, you need to sit down. I need to check the plating on the petit four. I checked it. It's fine. Sit down. He looked at her ankle. Or I'm going to pick you up and put you in a chair, and I am aware that would be awkward for both of us. She stopped. She looked at him. Marcus was 51 years old, built like a former linebacker, and entirely serious. She sat down. The kitchen prep stool was not comfortable, but it was better than the floor, which was where her ankle wanted her to be. She unlaced her shoe carefully and looked at the swelling that had been building for the last 90 minutes, with the detached assessment of someone evaluating a problem that belongs to someone else. "It's bad," Marcus said. "It's manageable." "Those are not the same thing." "No," she agreed, "they're not." She laced the shoe back up. "Give me 5 minutes. Mr. Bellacorte's doctor is outside," Marcus said carefully. "He came back. He said he wanted to check on you again." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Send him in," she said. Dr. Mancini was brief and clinical, and did not offer sympathy, which Isabella appreciated. He examined the ankle, adjusted the compression bandage he'd applied earlier, and told her plainly that she had a grade 2 sprain that was going to be significantly more painful in the morning than it was right now. "The gentleman asked me to give you this," Dr. Mancini said, and produced a small card with a phone number, written in clean, precise handwriting. He said, and I'm quoting, "She won't call it, but she should have it anyway." Isabella looked at the card. "He said you'd make that exact face," Dr. Mancini added. She put the card in her jacket pocket. She told herself it was because throwing it away would be wasteful. She went back to work. The last 40 minutes of the Founders Relief Gala ran with the smooth, controlled momentum of an event that has been built correctly from the foundation, the kind of evening that guests experience as effortless, and that the staff knows required 6 months of invisible preparation. Isabella ran it from the floor, which was where she always ran it, because the floor was where you could see everything that mattered. What she could also see from the floor was the particular quality of conversation happening at table 1. Roman had not left his seat. He was speaking quietly with a man Isabella didn't recognize. Compact 50s with the patient demeanor of someone who handles legal problems for a living. 2 of Roman's captains were on their phones. The financial investigators who had arrived at 9:47 were still present, though they had moved to the hotel's administrative wing. Charles Whitman had not returned to the ballroom. Natalie had. Isabella noticed this at 10:20, when Natalie Whitman reappeared from the corridor entrance and positioned herself at a standing table near the bar with a fresh glass of champagne and an expression that had shifted from the earlier social cruelty into something harder and less legible. She was watching Isabella. Not casually, with the focused attention of someone performing a calculation. Isabella noted it and kept working. At 10:41, the gala formally concluded. Guests began the slow social dispersal that always followed these events, the extended goodbyes, the business cards, the conversations that were actually negotiations, wearing party clothes. Isabella's team moved into cleanup coordination with the quiet efficiency she had built them into, and Isabella stood near the service corridor entrance and conducted a final operational review in her head. Then Charles Whitman walked back into the ballroom. He had the careful posture of a man who has had a difficult 45 minutes and has decided to respond to difficulty with aggression rather than retreat. His tie was slightly looser than it had been. His smile was gone. What replaced it was the particular expression of someone who has decided they have nothing left to lose in a specific conversation and intends to use that as a weapon. He crossed the ballroom directly toward Isabella. "My office," he said, "not a request." "The event hasn't fully cleared," Isabella said. "Marcus can handle clearing. My office, Isabella. Now." She looked at him. She had known since 9:52 that this conversation was coming. She had spent the intervening 49 minutes deciding exactly how she intended to have it. "All right," she said. Charles's office was on the hotel's second floor, which meant stairs, which meant Isabella's ankle had a specific opinion about the next 3 minutes that she overrode through the particular stubbornness that had gotten her through the last 6 years. She climbed the stairs at a normal pace and showed nothing. Charles closed the office door and turned around, and the smile was entirely gone now. "You went through confidential hotel documentation," he said, "and delivered it without authorization to a guest. Do you understand what that means legally?" "I understand what it means," Isabella said. I also understand what $3.8 million in fraudulent charitable billing means legally. I expect the investigators downstairs do as well. Those accounts are above your clearance level. You told me that in September, Isabella said. And in October. And I kept flagging the discrepancies, and you kept shutting me down, so I kept copies, because that's what you do when your manager is stealing from a charity and telling you the paperwork is above your pay grade. Charles's face went through several things rapidly. You don't have any idea what you're talking about. Those accounts are complex. The vendor registration numbers for Crown Meridian properties are public record, Isabella said. I pulled them myself. 3 of the 5 shell companies filing invoices against this hotel's charitable accounts are registered to the same holding company as Victor Serrano's legitimate real estate operation. That's not complexity. That's money laundering, and you knew about it. Be very careful, Charles said. His voice had dropped. Be very, very careful about what you're accusing me of. I'm not accusing you of anything, Isabella said. I gave the documentation to Roman Bellacorte because his organization's funds were directly implicated. He gave it to his attorney. His attorney gave it to a financial crimes task force. Whatever I'm saying, I said it to them 4 hours ago. You can be careful or not careful. The documentation is already where it needs to be. The silence in the office lasted exactly 4 seconds. You're fired, Charles said. Isabella had known it was coming. She had known it since the moment she sat down at table 1. Knowing it didn't make the words land any softer. They hit the center of her chest, with the particular weight of 6 years suddenly becoming past tense. For cause, Charles continued. Unauthorized access to confidential client documentation. Breach of professional conduct. Creating a public incident that embarrassed this hotel and its guests. I'll have security escort you from the building. Before you call security. Isabella said, you should know that I have already spoken to an employment attorney. She reached into her jacket and produced her phone and opened an email she had sent 40 minutes ago from the kitchen corridor while Marcus watched the dessert course. I sent her a summary of tonight's events at 10:19. She's reviewed the employment conduct policies. My actions tonight fall within the whistleblower protections of Pennsylvania employment law, which means terminating me for the documentation I provided to investigators is not a cause termination. It's a retaliation termination. And I have 6 years of documented instances of workplace discrimination, including your statement in March that someone with my presentation should remain behind the scenes. Charles stared at her. You wrote that down, he said. It was not entirely a question. I wrote everything down, Isabella said. For 6 years. Because I always knew that if I ever found something big enough, I was going to need proof of the pattern. She held his gaze. I'm going to leave this office now. I'll submit my formal resignation rather than accepting your termination, which my attorney advises will preserve my legal options. I would encourage you to speak to your own attorney before you say anything else tonight. She walked to the door. Isabella. His voice stopped her, not with authority this time, but with something rawer. The voice of a man whose particular version of the world has just collapsed around him and hasn't finished falling. You have no idea what you've done tonight. She looked back at him. I know exactly what I've done tonight, she said. For the first time in 6 years, I know exactly what I've done. She closed the door behind her. In the corridor alone. For the first time since before the gala began, Isabella Hart stood completely still for approximately 15 seconds and breathed. Her ankle was screaming. Her hands were shaking, not from fear she realized, but from the particular physical response of someone who has been running on adrenaline for 4 hours and has just stopped. Her chest felt strange, hollowed out and pressurized simultaneously, the way a room feels when a window is opened in cold weather. She had just quit her job, or been fired from it. The distinction mattered legally and didn't matter at all emotionally. 6 years. She started down the stairs. Roman Bellacorte was waiting at the bottom of them. He was not standing in the theatrical way of someone who has arranged an encounter. He was simply there speaking quietly with the compact, legal-looking man from earlier who noticed Isabella descending first and said something brief that caused Roman to look up. He took in her face, then her ankle, then her face again. How bad, he said. Which part? Isabella asked. Either. The ankle is a grade 2 sprain. The job is... She stopped, reorganized. I've resigned, or been fired. My attorney will determine which. You called an attorney. I emailed one, at 10:19. She reached the bottom of the stairs and shifted her weight carefully. You were right that I'd say yes to the regent. I'd like to negotiate the terms before I do. Something moved through Roman's expression, quick, contained, but genuinely there. Tonight. I have nowhere else to be, Isabella said, and I'd like to know what I'm walking into before I walk into it. Roman looked at her for a moment. Then he turned to the legal man. Get the car, and tell Caruso we're using the conference room at the Regent. The Regent, Isabella said. It's 20 minutes from here, it's quiet, and... He paused briefly. You should probably see what you'd be taking on before you agree to take it on. She looked at him steadily. Are you always this practical? I find it saves time, Roman said. The conference room at the Bellacorte Regent Hotel smelled like old carpet and institutional neglect, which told Isabella everything she needed to know about how long the place had been running below standard. The financial documents that Roman's assistant had pulled together were spread across a table that had seen better decades, and Isabella sat across from Roman and the legal man who was introduced as Thomas Caruso. Roman's general counsel and went through them page by page with the focused attention of someone who is very good at reading numbers and not particularly bothered by large ones. Roman watched her work. She was aware of it. She was also aware that his watching was not the surveillance of someone assessing a threat or the appraisal of someone calculating an advantage. It was the particular quality of attention given by someone who has rarely encountered a person they find genuinely interesting and isn't sure what to do about it. She kept her focus on the documents. Your occupancy rate is 31%, she said. Which means... It means we're failing, Roman said. It means your rate structure is wrong, your marketing is non-existent, and whoever has been managing your vendor contracts has been bleeding you for approximately... She ran a quick calculation, 2 years. This one, she tapped a page, is a linen service contract. You're paying $400 per month more than the market rate. This one is a food service agreement that should have been renegotiated 8 months ago. The operations director before last handled vendor contracts, Caruso said. Where is he now? A pause. He left, Roman said, with a specific quality of finality that Isabella decided not to pursue. The staff retention numbers, she said instead. You've had 40% turnover in the last 18 months. The previous director wasn't, Caruso started. Treated them well. Isabella finished. I can see it in the dates. The senior staff left first, the ones who had options. You're left with people who need the job too much to leave and resent the place for it. She looked up. That's fixable. It takes longer than the financial problems, but it's fixable. How long? Roman asked. The vendor contracts I can renegotiate in 30 days. The occupancy rate will show improvement in 60 if I can reposition the rate structure and get a marketing plan in place. The staff, she considered, 90 days before you'd see real cultural movement, a year before it sticks. And you can do this. I've been doing it for other people for 6 years, Isabella said. The difference is that I'd be doing it for myself, for the staff. She paused. And for whatever you're trying to build here. Roman leaned forward slightly. What do you think I'm trying to build? It was a direct question offered without deflection, and she appreciated the directness enough to match it. I think you're trying to make something legitimate, she said. I think the Regent is part of that, a real business run properly that doesn't need anything illegal behind it to survive. And I think the reason you've been unable to get there is that you've been hiring operations directors who are afraid of you and afraid people make small decisions. She held his gaze. I'm not afraid of you. You mentioned that. I'll probably keep mentioning it. It seems relevant. Roman was quiet for a moment. The salary is... I know what the salary is. You told me tonight. She had already done the math in the car. The salary would pay off her mother's restaurant mortgage in 14 months. She had not told him that, and she did not intend to. I have additional conditions. Of course you do, Roman said, and the thing that crossed his face was definitely the beginning of a smile this time, even if he contained it before it fully arrived. Independent board oversight for the region's financial accounts, Isabella said. Not your people, independent. I'll name 2 of the 3 members. Agreed. Whistleblower protections in my contract, specifically protecting my ability to report financial irregularities to external authorities without consequence. Agreed. She paused. You agreed to that very quickly. It's a reasonable condition, Roman said. If there's something happening in this hotel's accounts that you need to report externally, I want it reported. That's the entire point. She studied him for a moment. And if I find something that implicates your organization directly? Then you report it, Roman said, and we deal with it. The simplicity of it landed with unexpected weight. She had spent 6 years in a place where straightforward answers were always hiding something. She was not entirely sure what to do with one that wasn't. I want the staff protection clause in writing before I sign anything, she said. No layoffs in the first 90 days without my direct approval. Done. And I want an office with a window. Roman blinked. It was the first time she had seen anything surprise him. The operations director's office has a window. I've worked in a basement coordination room for 4 years. I want a window. Non-negotiable. The smile broke through this time brief, genuine, entirely unguarded, and gone again quickly. The window is non-negotiable, Roman agreed. Thomas Caruso was making notes and doing an admirable job of pretending he was not watching his employer smile at an employee for the first time in recent memory. At midnight, with the preliminary terms outlined and the formal contracts assigned to Caruso's office for drafting in the morning, Isabella sat in a chair in the Bellacorte Regent's conference room, with her ankle elevated on a second chair, a cup of coffee that one of Roman's staff had produced from somewhere, and the particular settled feeling of someone who has made a large decision and found surprisingly that it doesn't feel like a mistake. Tell me about your mother's restaurant, Roman said. She looked at him across the table. Why? You mentioned it tonight. Briefly. When you were explaining why you flagged the invoices, you said the salary could save her restaurant. I didn't say that. I thought that. You said it, Roman said. You may not have meant to. Isabella was quiet for a moment. Her name is Patricia. She opened the restaurant 30 years ago with my father 2 years before he died. It's called Hart's Table. It's in West Philadelphia, which means the neighborhood has changed around it 3 times, and the rent has followed each change. She has 12 months before she loses it if the revenue doesn't improve. What kind of food? American, Southern. The kind of cooking that takes a full day to do right, and that no one adequately compensates you for because they assume it's simple. She looked at her coffee. She taught me how to feed people. Not food service. Actually feed people. Make them feel that someone thought about what they needed before they arrived. Roman was quiet for a long moment. The Regent's restaurant has been closed for 8 months, he said. Isabella looked up. The previous director shut it down as a cost-cutting measure, Roman continued. It was profitable before that. The kitchen is intact. The equipment is maintained. He paused. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm offering information. She stared at him. You're absolutely suggesting something. I'm providing context that you may find professionally relevant. Roman. She used his name without planning to, and they both registered it, a small involuntary shift in the air of the conference room. Yes, he said, very carefully. Don't be strategic about things that matter, she said. If you want to suggest something that involves my mother's restaurant, suggest it plainly. I'll say yes or no. He looked at her for a moment. Would your mother consider consulting on the Regent's restaurant reopening as a paid consultant? Her recipes, her expertise. Full credit on the menu. Isabella thought of her mother, 63 years old, up at 5 every morning, cooking for a neighborhood that had slowly priced itself away from her, holding on to 30 years of her husband's dream with both hands and refusing to let it go. I'll ask her, Isabella said. That's not yes or no. It's not my decision to make alone, Isabella said. Which you should understand since you apparently also make decisions that way. Something shifted in his expression. Something quieter than the contained professional manner he'd maintained all evening. More personal, more unguarded. My brother made the same decision I'm trying to make now, Roman said. to legitimize the business, to close the operations that couldn't be made clean. A pause. He didn't get to finish. Isabella waited. 7 years ago, Roman said. It was ruled an accident. It wasn't. He looked at the table. I spent 4 years after that being exactly what people expected me to be, because I thought it was the safest way to protect what was left. And then I woke up one morning, and I was 40 years old, and I was building a monument to a version of this family that my brother died trying to end. He looked up. The Regent is not just a hotel to me. It's the first thing I've tried to build that he would have recognized as worth building. Isabella held the weight of that for a moment. Then we'd better not fail, she said. It was not romantic, and it was not cold. It was simply the truth of someone who has understood something important and responded to it directly. Roman looked at her for a long moment. No, he said. We'd better not. At 12:45, Roman's driver brought the car around to take Isabella home. Her ankle had stiffened during the last hour, and the descent from the Regent's main entrance required more care than she allowed herself to show. She was working on the ratio between honesty and stubbornness, and had not yet found the right balance. Roman walked out with her. She hadn't asked him to, and he hadn't announced that he was going to. He simply came. You'll have the preliminary contract by tomorrow afternoon, he said. Caruso is fast. I'll have my attorney review it by end of day. Of course. She reached the car. The driver had opened the door. She turned to say something professional and final and properly boundaried, because that was what the moment called for. The chair, she said instead. Roman looked at her. The chair at your table tonight, she said. You didn't ask me to sit in it. You just made sure I knew it was there. Yes, he said. Why? He considered the question with the seriousness it apparently deserved. Because you'd been standing all evening on an ankle that was getting worse every hour, and you were going to keep standing because no one had offered you a reason to stop, and He paused. I didn't want to tell you what to do, but I didn't want you to have no option but the floor either. Isabella was quiet for a moment. That was a decent thing, she said. I'm occasionally capable of those, Roman said. I'll keep that in mind. She got into the car carefully, because the ankle had a specific view of the movement required. Good night, Roman. Good night, Isabella. The car moved. She did not look back because looking back was the kind of thing that made a straightforward situation complicated, and she had plenty of complicated already. But she thought about the chair. She thought about a man who controls an empire built on fear, choosing at the specific moment that mattered, not to give an order, and instead simply making sure that a woman he'd known for 4 hours had somewhere to sit if she chose it. She took the card with his number out of her pocket. The handwriting was clean and precise, the handwriting she thought of someone who is very deliberate about what they put in writing. She did not throw it away. She looked out the window at Philadelphia, moving past in the dark, and she thought about her mother's restaurant, and the Regent's closed kitchen, and a man who was trying to build something his murdered brother would have recognized, and she thought about how strange it was that the worst night of her professional life had somehow become the first night in 6 years that she felt like she could see the shape of what came next. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered it. Isabella Hart. A woman's voice, brisk, professional. This is Catherine Voss. I'm with the Pennsylvania Financial Crimes Task Force. We'd like to speak with you tomorrow morning regarding the documentation you provided to the Bellacorte Organization's Council this evening. A pause. We're also going to need your full employment history at the Crown Meridian, particularly any documentation you retained regarding financial discrepancies. I have 14 months of documentation, Isabella said. A brief pause on the line. 14 months. I flagged the first irregularity in September of last year, Isabella said. I have copies of everything I flagged, everything I was told to ignore, and records of every conversation I had with Charles Whitman about the accounts. Another pause longer this time. Ms. Hart, I'll be direct with you. The scale of what you've provided tonight is... The agent stopped, reorganized. We're going to need more than a morning meeting. Are you available to meet with our team on Thursday? I'll make myself available, Isabella said. Good. A pause. One more thing. The documentation you identified the shell company's the Serrano connection. How did you know where to look? Isabella thought about 14 months of quiet, careful watching. Of keeping copies when she was told to stop looking. Of doing the work that no one else was going to do because it needed to be done. I pay attention, she said, and I write everything down. She hung up. The car was crossing the bridge now, the city lights spreading below Philadelphia, laid out in the dark, like a problem she was about to spend the next year solving. Her ankle throbbed. Her hands were finally fully still. She put Roman's card back in her pocket. Tomorrow, she decided, was going to be a very different kind of day. The Bellacorte Regent smelled like potential and neglect in equal measure, which Isabella decided on her first official morning as operations director was actually the best possible starting condition. You couldn't fix what was already perfect. You could only fix what was broken, and the Regent was broken in ways she could see clearly and intended to address in a specific order. She arrived at 6:45. Not because Roman had asked her to, he hadn't asked her anything about her hours, which she appreciated, but because 6:45 was when the overnight staff finished their shift and the day staff began, and that transition was where you learned the truth about a hotel's culture. Not the version management presented. The real version. The one that lived in the handoff conversations, the body language, the particular silence of people who had stopped expecting anything to improve. What she found at 6:45 was a night porter named Gerald, who had been with the Regent for 19 years, and who looked at her with the careful, evaluative expression of someone who has survived 4 operations directors and intends to survive this one too by maintaining appropriate distance. "Ms. Hart," he said. "Isabella," she said. "What's the worst problem in this building that no one has told the ownership about?" Gerald looked at her for a long moment. Then he told her about the third-floor plumbing, the linen contract that was delivering substandard product at premium pricing. The fact that the kitchen exhaust system had been tagged for repair 7 months ago, and the previous director had signed off on the repair without anyone actually performing it. And the server on the breakfast team who had been stealing from the till in amounts small enough to evade the automated flagging system, but large enough to matter over 12 months. "How long have you known about the till situation?" Isabella asked. 8 months, Gerald said. "Why didn't you report it?" "To who?" Gerald said with the particular flatness of someone whose answer is also an indictment. "The last director told me to handle front-of-house issues at my level. The one before that..." He stopped. "You can finish that sentence," Isabella said. "The one before that would have used it as a reason to cut the whole breakfast team," Gerald said. "It was easier to watch it and wait." Isabella nodded. "I need a list of every issue this staff has been watching and waiting on. Today. Not a formal report, just tell me. All of it." Gerald studied her for another moment. Then he said, "That's going to be a long conversation." "I have time," Isabella said. "I cleared my entire morning." She hadn't, actually. But some things were more important than the schedule. By the end of her first week, Isabella had renegotiated 2 vendor contracts, addressed the kitchen exhaust situation with an actual repair crew, rather than a signature spoken privately with the breakfast team member about the till, which resulted in a repayment arrangement and a probationary period rather than a termination, because the amounts involved were recoverable, and the man had 3 children, and Isabella was not in the business of destroying families over mistakes that could be corrected, and held a full staff meeting in which she said exactly one thing that mattered. "If you see a problem," she said, "tell me. I will not shoot the messenger. I will not use the information against you. I will fix the problem, and I will tell you how I fixed it, and we will all be better for knowing." She looked around the room at 62 faces in various states of cautious disbelief. "I know that's not what you've been told before. I know I have to earn that. So watch me for 30 days, and then decide whether you believe it." Marcus, whom she had recruited from the Crown Meridian, with a salary adjustment and the promise of a title that actually reflected what he did, leaned over from his seat beside her. "They're listening," he said quietly. "They're waiting," Isabella said. "There's a difference. Listening is free. Waiting means they'll hold judgment." She looked at the room again. "Waiting is fine. I'll take waiting." Roman appeared at the Regent 3 times in the first 2 weeks. Not constantly, not in the way of someone checking on an investment or managing an employee, but in the way of someone who had a genuine interest in what was being built and hadn't yet decided how much of that interest was professional. The first time he walked the floor with her and asked specific intelligent questions about the vendor renegotiations that told her he had actually read the preliminary reports she'd sent to Caruso's office. He did not offer suggestions. He asked questions and listened to the answers. The second time, he brought his godfather. Anthony Bellacorte was 67 years old, silver-haired, with the comfortable authority of someone who has been trusted absolutely for decades and has learned to wear that trust like a second skin. He was warm in a way that Roman was not openly, so the kind of warm that immediately puts you at ease, that makes you feel seen and included without having done anything to earn it. Isabella noticed with the particular instinct she had spent 30 years developing that she did not entirely trust it. She wasn't sure why. Anthony said nothing wrong. He was gracious and interested, and asked thoughtful questions about her plans for the Regent's restaurant, which her mother had agreed after 3 days of persuasion and one very long Sunday dinner to consult on. He praised Roman's decision to hire her. He smiled at the right moments. She noted the feeling and filed it and said nothing, because a feeling was not a fact, and she had learned the difference. The third time Roman came, he came alone at 7 in the evening when most of the staff had turned over from day to night shift. He found Isabella in the closed restaurant space, sitting on the floor. Her ankle was fully healed by now, with renovation invoices spread around her in a pattern that made sense to her and probably looked chaotic to everyone else. "You're doing the floor thing," he said, looking down at her. "I think better this way," she said. "Sit down or go away. Those are the options." He sat down. He did not make a comment about it. He looked at the invoices. "These are from the Regent's renovation 3 years ago," she said, "before you took over management from your father's board." "Yes, some of them don't match." She picked up 2 pages and held them next to each other. Same contractor, same date range, different materials listed. Both invoices were paid, which means either someone ordered duplicate materials and the excess was... She stopped. Roman was very still. "Where," he said slowly, "does the contractor's access route run?" Isabella looked at him. "What do you mean?" "The renovation involved the sublevels," Roman said. "The loading areas below the east wing. I approved the budget, but I didn't. I wasn't reviewing the specific access points at that level, because I was managing 3 other transitions simultaneously." He looked at the invoices. "The freight access for that renovation. Where does it connect to?" Isabella pulled out the building schematic she had requested from the city assessor's office 2 days ago. She requested a lot of documents from a lot of offices, which was simply how she worked, and they looked at it together, their heads close over the paper, and Isabella traced the freight access route with her finger and stopped when her finger reached the notation in the bottom left corner. Private Freight Terminal. Waterfront Access. Crown Meridian Properties Joint Management Agreement current. She looked up at Roman. His jaw was set. His expression had gone to the particular stillness that she had learned meant something genuinely significant was happening beneath the surface. "Roman," she said carefully, "how long has Serrano had a joint management agreement on that terminal?" "That agreement," Roman said, "should have been terminated 2 years ago." "It wasn't." "No," he said. "It wasn't." He stood up. "I need to make a phone call." "Wait." She stood too. "The renovation invoices the duplicate materials. Someone ordered twice the amount of," she checked the invoice, "reinforced concrete paneling for the sub-level renovation, and paid for both orders, which means either there's twice as much concrete in that sub-level as the plans show, or the second order was cover," Roman said, "for construction that isn't on the plans." They looked at each other. "There's something in that sub-level," Isabella said. "Something that was built during the renovation that your father's board approved without knowing what they were approving." "Or knowing exactly what they were approving," Roman said. And the weight in those words was the weight of a man who has spent years learning that the people he trusted most were the ones he should have questioned first. Haimad 2 phone calls from the corridor. Short, precise, in a language that was partly logistics and partly the particular shorthand of people who have worked together long enough to communicate in half sentences. He came back looking like someone who has confirmed something he hoped wasn't true. "My security team is going to do a structural assessment of the sublevel tonight," he said. "I need you to stay out of that area until I tell you it's clear." "What do you think is down there?" Isabella asked. "I think," Roman said carefully, "that someone used the Regent's renovation as cover to build a transit route, and I think they've been planning to use it during the investment summit next month." He looked at her. "The summit has international delegates and significant federal presence. If weapons move through that route during the summit, and my organization's name is on the building's management records—" "It looks like you moved them," Isabella said. "It looks like I moved them," Roman agreed. "And everything I've been working toward for 3 years disappears." Isabella sat with that for a moment. Who knew about the renovation plans? Who had access to approve the contractor and the sublevel work? Roman was quiet. "Roman," she said. "Who had that access?" "The board," he said. "And my godfather who managed the renovation on the board's behalf." The silence between them had a particular quality. The silence of two people standing on the edge of a conclusion that one of them has been building toward longer than the other. "You've suspected Anthony before," Isabella said. It was not a question. "I've refused to suspect Anthony before," Roman said. "There's a difference." She let that sit. She understood it, the particular stubbornness of love, the way trust that runs deep enough becomes its own form of blindness. "The forged messages," she said. Roman looked at her sharply. "What Caruso called me this morning. He said there were messages surfacing, communications between me and Elias Grant." She watched Roman's face. "Elias is a federal prosecutor. I was a friend in college, a close friend. The messages suggest I've been feeding him information about your organization." Roman was very still. "Caruso told me about the messages. And my captains want you removed from the property." There it was. She had been waiting for it since Caruso's call had been measuring the distance between the woman Roman had sat on his hotel floor with last night reading invoices and the suspect his captains were now demanding he act against. "Do you believe the messages are real?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "No." "But you hesitated." "For approximately 4 seconds," Roman said. "Before I told my captains I would not act without evidence." 4 seconds is a long time," Isabella said. "Yes," he said. "It is." He didn't deflect it or explain it away. "I'm sorry." She nodded, filed it. Did not let him see that the 4 seconds had landed harder than she intended to show. "The messages were fabricated," she said. "I can prove it. The accounting codes referenced in the messages, the ones that supposedly show me pointing Elias toward specific accounts, those codes are from the Regent's new system, the system I built after I arrived. The messages are dated 3 weeks before I started working here." Roman stared at her. "Whoever made them," Isabella said, "made them quickly and made a mistake. Because they used the current system's codes, and the current system didn't exist when the messages were supposedly sent." She paused. "Which means whoever fabricated them has access to the Regent's current accounting infrastructure. Which means they're close." "Anthony reviewed the accounting transition documents," Roman said. His voice had gone very flat. "Last week. He asked to see them. He said it was a routine board oversight review." They stood in the corridor of the Regent, and Isabella watched Roman Bellacorte process the specific and particular agony of a man who has just confirmed what he spent years refusing to know. "He arranged your brother's murder," Isabella said quietly. "Didn't he?" Roman was silent for a long time. "Marco wanted to do exactly what I'm trying to do," Roman said finally. "Legitimize. Close the operations. Build something clean. And Anthony was the one who told him it was impossible, that the family's enemies would never allow it, that the only safety was in the old way." He stopped. "Marco died 6 months after he announced the plan. The men responsible were found. They were dealt with. But the person who arranged it, who gave the access codes, who told Marco's enemies exactly where he'd be." Roman's jaw tightened. "I never looked at Anthony. Because Anthony was the one holding my hand at the funeral." Isabella said nothing. There was nothing to say. She simply stood beside him and let the weight of it exist without trying to make it smaller. He's doing it again, Roman said. The same play. Make me look like a criminal, destroy the redevelopment agreement, and go back to the way things were. Because Anthony Bellacorte has been making money in the old way for 40 years, and he does not know how to exist in a clean world. The summit is in 18 days, Isabella said. I know. If they move weapons through that sub-level during the summit. I know, Isabella. Then we have 18 days to prove the route exists, document Anthony's connection to it, and shut it down without... She stopped, rearranged. Without you doing something that ends with you in a federal courtroom instead of Anthony. Roman looked at her. You're already planning. I've been planning since I read the duplicate invoices, she said. I just didn't know what I was planning for yet. He looked at her for a long moment, that particular quality of attention she had become familiar with over the past 2 weeks. The kind that felt less like assessment and more like someone deciding how much of themselves to bring into a room. My captains are going to push to have you removed, he said. They think the messages are real, or they think it doesn't matter whether they're real, that the perception of a liability is enough. Then tell them I'm staying, Isabella said, and that you'll explain your reasoning when this is over. They won't like that. No, she agreed. But you're not asking them to like it. You're telling them how it is. She held his gaze. You said 4 seconds. I'm giving you credit for what you did in the 5th. Don't waste it by letting your captains make this decision for you. Roman held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. She stays, he said when someone answered. That's not a discussion. Get Petrov and Damasi to the Regent by 8 tonight. We have a different problem to solve. He hung up, looked at her. The sublevel access, he said. You have the building schematics. And the original renovation permits, she said. And 14 months of practice noticing things that other people decide not to see. She picked up the invoices from the floor. Her hands were steady. Then let's find what Anthony built, Roman said, and make sure he can't use it. What Isabella found over the next 6 days was worse than a transit route. The sub-level beneath the Regent's East Wing contained approximately 200 linear feet of reinforced corridor accessed through a false wall in the loading dock that had been constructed during the renovation using the duplicate materials billed to the project. The corridor connected directly to the private freight terminal under the Crown Meridian Joint Management Agreement. It was clean maintained and clearly in active use. She did not discover this by going into the sub-level herself. Roman's security team handled the physical assessment, and Roman had asked her with a directness that was also something close to, please not to go down there until they knew what was in it. She discovered it by mapping the building's electrical load against the renovation plans and finding 47 circuits drawing power to a section of the building that officially didn't exist. You found a hidden corridor, Marcus said, looking at her load analysis over her shoulder, by looking at the electric bill. I found an anomaly in the electrical consumption, Isabella said. The corridor was the explanation. That's... Marcus stopped. How long did this take you? 3 evenings. Most people wouldn't have known to look. Most people hadn't spent 4 months teaching themselves to find financial discrepancies in places where other people decided not to look, Isabella said. It's the same skill, different data. Roman's security chief, Petrov, a man of few words and significant physical presence, who had initially regarded Isabella with the professional suspicion of someone whose job security depends on identifying threats, had by the end of the first week shifted to regarding her with something that might in better light be characterized as cautious respect. The corridor connects to 3 separate access points, Petrov told them on day 6. All 3 appear on the freight terminal's loading schedule as routine maintenance access. Whoever designed this has been moving small shipments through for at least 8 months without triggering any freight monitoring. Small shipments, Roman said, until the summit. The summit creates cover, Isabella said. International traffic increased freight movement, federal attention focused on the delegates rather than the building's infrastructure. It's a good window. 18 days became 12 days became, she checked, 8 days. We need the evidence before we move, Roman said. Documented. Transmitted to someone outside this organization before Anthony knows we have it. I've been documenting, Isabella said. She opened her laptop and turned it toward Roman. The electrical load analysis. The duplicate invoices with the contractor, who subsequently dissolved his LLC 14 months ago. The building permits that don't match the actual construction. And, she pulled up a final document, the Freight Terminal's Joint Management Agreement, which contains a clause allowing Crown Meridian Properties to schedule unmonitored maintenance access between the hours of 2 and 5 a.m. on non-summit days. Roman stared at the screen. That clause, he said, was not in the original agreement. No, Isabella said. It was added by amendment 14 months ago. The amendment was signed on behalf of the Bellacorte organization by... She paused, not for effect, but because she was still aware of what the name meant to the man sitting across from her. Anthony Bellacorte, in his capacity as senior board advisor. The room was very quiet. Petrov looked at Roman. Roman looked at the document. Transmit everything, he said quietly. Caruso, the task force contact Agent Voss. Already packaged, Isabella said. I can send it in 30 seconds. Send it. She sent it. 3 minutes later, her phone rang. Agent Voss. Isabella answered, put it on speaker, and watched Roman Bellacorte sit in a chair in his own hotel's conference room, and listen to a federal agent confirm that what his godfather had built beneath his property was exactly what they feared. The weapon cache has been confirmed by our team's independent assessment, Voss said. We're talking about a significant shipment, the kind of volume that if successfully moved during the summit, would have resulted in federal charges against the Bellacorte organization's senior leadership. A pause. Mr. Bellacorte, I need to know, do you want to be in the room when we move on this, or do you want distance? Roman looked at Isabella. She said nothing. This was his decision. I'll be in the room, Roman said. What happened next moved faster than Isabella had expected, and slower than she feared. Petrov's team sealed the sublevel access. Federal agents positioned themselves at the freight terminal. Roman's attorney filed the documentary evidence through official channels at 9:47 in the morning, 8 days before the summit. And Anthony Bellacorte called Roman at 10:15. Isabella was sitting across the conference table from Roman when the call came. She saw his face when he looked at the phone, the specific private grief of someone who has known a thing for a week and is now being asked to act on it. He looked at her once. She nodded. He answered, Roman. Anthony's voice was warm. It was always warm. I've been hearing some concerning things about the Regent's sublevel assessment. I think we should talk before this goes any further. There are details about that renovation that you don't have the full picture on. Tell me, Roman said. A pause. Not on the phone. Come to the house, just the two of us. I don't think that's a good idea, Roman said. Another pause, longer this time. The warm voice went very still. What have you done, Roman? What I should have done 7 years ago, Roman said. I'm sorry, Anthony, for whatever that's worth. He ended the call. In the silence that followed, Isabella did not say anything. She did not offer comfort or analysis or the professional distance of someone who understands that the work and the feelings are separate. She simply reached across the table and put her hand briefly over his 1 second, 2 seconds, 3, and then took it back because he was not the kind of man who wanted to be held together, only the kind who needed to know that someone understood what holding it together cost. Anthony attempted to access the freight terminal at 2:17 in the morning. Federal agents were waiting. Victor Serrano, who arrived at the terminal 20 minutes later with 4 associates and the expectation of a smooth operation, found the same thing. The arrest was quiet and fast, the way things arranged by people who have done this before tend to be. Isabella got the call from Agent Voss at 2:49 a.m. She was awake. She had been awake, sitting in the Regent's closed restaurant space, surrounded by her mother's handwritten recipe notes, planning a reopening menu for a kitchen that still smelled like 8 months of emptiness, and underneath that, something older and warmer. It's done, Voss said. Both of them. Clean arrest evidence intact, no complications. Thank you, Isabella said. Ms. Hart. Voss paused. I've been doing this for 16 years. The documentation you assembled is the most thorough independent evidence package I've received from a civilian source. Ever. I pay attention, Isabella said. And I write things down. She sat in the quiet of the closed restaurant for a long time after the call ended. Outside Philadelphia was dark and mostly silent, the city doing the necessary work of being itself, between the hours when people were watching. She thought about the first morning she had walked into the Regent and found Gerald at the end of his 19-year night shift, with all his carefully kept silences and his long list of problems that no one had wanted to hear about. She thought about 62 people at a staff meeting watching and waiting. She thought about her mother's handwriting on the recipe cards, 30 years of a family's cooking distilled into measured ingredients and margin notes that said things like, "Don't rush the gravy and this one needs patience." She thought about Roman 2 floors above her, in an office he was probably not sleeping in, sitting with the weight of Anthony Bellacorte, and a brother 7 years gone, and the particular loneliness of a man who has spent so long being feared that he has almost forgotten what it feels like to be understood. Her phone buzzed. A text, not a call. "Are you still in the building, Roman?" "Restaurant level," she sent back. 30 seconds later, she heard the elevator. He came and sat down on the floor beside her without being asked, without making a comment about it, and looked at the recipe cards spread around her. "Is this the menu?" he asked. "Beginning of it," she said. "My mother has opinions about the dessert section that I'm still negotiating." What's her position? That no restaurant menu is complete without bread pudding, and that I am wrong to suggest it might not fit the concept. She paused. She's probably right. Roman picked up one of the cards. "Read it. Set it down carefully." "The restaurant opens in 6 weeks," Isabella said. "The occupancy rate is up to 44%. The vendor contracts are saving us $11,000 a month." She looked at him. "The Regent is going to be fine." "I know," Roman said. "You were always going to make it fine." "I had help," she said. "You had a staff that needed someone to believe the work was worth doing," Roman said. "You brought that. The rest followed." She looked at him sitting on the floor of a closed restaurant at 3 in the morning, in the same suit he'd been wearing for 20 hours, with the particular exhaustion of a man who has put something down that he carried for a very long time. "He was at the funeral," Roman said quietly. "Anthony. He held my hand." "I know," Isabella said. "I keep thinking about that. Not the betrayal. I've had a week to process the betrayal. I keep thinking about the funeral and wondering how a person does that. How they hold your hand while you're burying someone they arranged to kill." He stopped. "And then I think about Marco, and I think he knew. Marco knew something was wrong with Anthony. He said it once 2 weeks before he died. I told him he was being paranoid." "You were 26 years old," Isabella said. "That's not an excuse." "No," she agreed. "It's a context. There's a difference." She looked at him. "You chose to lower your weapon tonight. You called Agent Voss. You filed the documentation. You gave Anthony to the law instead of to Petrov." She paused. "Marco would have recognized that." Roman was quiet for a long time. "You do that," he said finally. "Do what?" "Say the thing that's true, instead of the thing that's comfortable," he said. "Most people, even people who care about you, will choose comfort. You don't. You say what's accurate." He looked at her. "I don't know if you understand how rare that is." Isabella thought about 6 years of swallowing truth because it wasn't safe. About 14 months of quiet documentation because no one wanted to hear what she was seeing. About a night in a ballroom when she had walked to a table she had no business walking to and said what she knew because it needed to be said. "I used to choose comfort," she said. "I chose it for a long time. It turns out comfort was making me disappear." She looked at the recipe cards. "I'm done disappearing." Roman looked at her, and the thing in his expression was not the professional interest, or the careful distance, or the contained grief she had seen over the past 2 weeks. It was something simpler and more unguarded than any of those things. "Good," he said. She picked up her mother's bread pudding recipe. "Read it. Made a decision." "Fine," she said. "It goes on the menu." "The bread pudding. My mother is usually right," Isabella said. "I've spent enough time arguing with things that are true." Roman looked at the recipe card in her hands and then at her face, and he laughed a real laugh, not the contained almost smile she had catalogued over 2 weeks, but an actual laugh, the kind that belongs to a person rather than a professional, and it changed the whole character of the room. Isabella thought that she would probably remember it for a long time. She thought 8 days ago, I was sitting in a ballroom watching 200 people pretend they weren't looking at me. Tonight, I am sitting on the floor of a closed restaurant at 3 in the morning, and a man who spent his whole life making people afraid of him just laughed, like someone who forgot for a second that he was supposed to be frightening. She thought I am not invisible. I have not been invisible for some time now. I just needed to stop standing in my own way long enough to notice. She put the bread pudding recipe in the confirmed stack. Outside Philadelphia was beginning the slow business of becoming morning. The arrests made the news by 6 a.m. Not the full story. The full story would take months of federal proceedings to surface completely, but enough. Prominent Philadelphia businessman, Victor Serrano, and senior advisor to the Bellacorte organization, arrested in connection with weapons trafficking and conspiracy charges. The headline ran on 3 local stations before Isabella had finished her first cup of coffee, and by 8 a.m., her phone had received 41 messages from people she hadn't spoken to in varying lengths of time. All of them variants of the same question delivered in different registers of shock. She answered none of them. She had work to do. The Regent's morning briefing ran at 8:30 as it did every morning, and Isabella ran it the same way she ran everything directly, specifically, without unnecessary preamble. She told her staff what they needed to know, that there had been legal developments involving the building's previous management arrangements, that those developments were being handled by appropriate authorities, and that their jobs, their schedules, and their paychecks were entirely unaffected. She told them that the restaurant opening was still 6 weeks out, and that she needed the kitchen team at full capacity starting Monday. She told Gerald, who had become in the past 3 weeks something close to her most reliable intelligence source on the building's actual operational condition, that the third-floor plumbing situation was being addressed by a contractor. She had vetted herself, and not by the previous director's preferred vendor, who had been billing the Regent for work not performed for approximately 18 months. Gerald said, "I've been waiting 3 years to hear someone say that." "I know," Isabella said. "I'm sorry it took this long." Roman called at 9:15. Not a text, a call which told her something about the morning he was having. "The board is convening an emergency session at 11, he said. "Anthony's removal has to be formalized. Caruso is handling the legal side. I need you there." "As what?" Isabella asked. "As the person who documented the evidence that made the arrests possible," Roman said. "And as operations director of the Regent, which is now officially the organization's most visible legitimate asset, and the thing I intend to point to when the board asks me what comes next." Isabella was quiet for a moment. The board won't like that a woman they've never met is sitting in an emergency session about Anthony Bellacorte. "Several things are happening today that the board won't like," Roman said. "You're the one I'm least concerned about." She was there at 11. The Bellacorte board met in a building downtown that had the particular atmosphere of a place that had conducted serious business for a long time and intended to continue doing so regardless of who was sitting at the table. There were 7 members. 4 of them looked at Isabella when she entered with the careful assessing neutrality of men who have learned to manage their reactions. 2 of them didn't bother with neutrality. One of them, a man named DeSanto, who had been on the board since Roman's father's time, looked at her with the particular attention of someone deciding whether a problem is temporary or structural. Roman sat at the head of the table. He did not introduce Isabella as anything other than her title. He did not explain her presence. He simply began. "Anthony has been formally charged," he said. "The charges include conspiracy to traffic illegal weapons, falsification of corporate documents, and pending the federal investigation's completion, probable conspiracy in the murder of Marco Bellacorte." He let that sit. He did not perform grief or manage the room's reaction to the name. He just let it be there. "I have retained outside counsel to conduct an independent review of all board decisions made with Anthony's involvement over the past 7 years. That review will determine whether any additional changes to the board's composition are necessary." DeSanto spoke first. "Roman, this is, we understand the legal situation is serious, but the optics of bringing in an outside review, having external counsel going through 7 years of board decisions." "I know what it means," Roman said. "I'm doing it anyway." The redevelopment contract is intact, Roman said. The city confirmed it this morning. The charges against Anthony and Serrano implicate them as individuals, not the organization. Provided we cooperate fully with the investigation, which we will, the contract survives. DeSanto looked at Isabella. And the Regent is operating at 44% occupancy and trending upward, Isabella said. The vendor renegotiations are saving $11,000 monthly. The restaurant opens in 6 weeks. The staff retention rate since the new management structure was implemented is 100%. She met DeSanto's gaze steadily. If you have specific questions about the Regent's operational status, I'm happy to answer them. I have the financials with me. DeSanto looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Roman. She's good. Yes, Roman said simply. The board meeting lasted 2.5 hours. It was not comfortable, and Isabella did not expect it to be. These were men who had operated in a specific way for a long time, and Roman was asking them to operate differently, and differently was always harder than it looked from the outside. There were arguments. There were moments where two board members talked over each other, and Roman let them run until they'd said what needed to be said, and then he spoke, and the room settled. By the end, the independent review was authorized. Anthony's removal was formalized. And Roman announced that he would be stepping back from 3 of the organization's remaining operational divisions, the ones that Caruso had identified as most difficult to legitimize, and compensating the businesses those divisions had financially impacted over the preceding decade. The room went very quiet when he said that last part. That's, one of the board members started. Expensive, Roman said. I know. Do the math and bring me the number by end of week. We'll establish a structured compensation timeline. Roman, DeSanto said carefully. That kind of admission of, it's not an admission, Roman said. It's an accounting. We took money that wasn't ours. We give it back. That's not complicated. Isabella, sitting at the end of the table with her operational reports in front of her, looked at him and thought he means it. He has decided completely, and without visible reservation, and he is not going to walk it back in the parking garage when the board can't hear him. She had not been certain until that moment whether Roman Bellacorte was a man who made good decisions under pressure, or a man who performed good decisions when it was useful. She understood now that the distinction was real, and that she had just witnessed which kind of man he was. The meeting ended at 1:30. The board members filed out in clusters, talking quietly with the particular intensity of people who have a great deal to process and limited time to process it. DeSanto stopped beside Isabella on his way out. The bread pudding, he said. Isabella looked at him. I heard the Regent's restaurant is reopening, DeSanto said. My wife used to love that place, before it closed. He paused. I hope the menu is good. It will be, Isabella said. He nodded and left. Roman stood at the window after the room had cleared, not looking at anything specific, just standing with the particular stillness of someone who has done something large and is waiting to find out whether he will regret it. Isabella gathered her reports. You gave up a significant amount of territory today. Yes. And money. A great deal of money. And 3 of your captains are going to push back on the compensation timeline in ways that could get complicated. Almost certainly. She looked at him. Are you all right? He turned from the window. The question had landed differently than she'd intended. She could see it in his face, the slight recalibration of a man who is not often asked that question and is not entirely sure what to do with it. My brother wanted to do this, Roman said. For 7 years I told myself I was protecting what he left behind. Tonight I understand I was protecting the thing that killed him. He was quiet. So no, not entirely. But better than I was this morning. She nodded. That's enough for now. Is it? It's what you have, Isabella said. Work with it. He almost smiled. You're not very comforting. I'm accurate, she said. You said you preferred that. I do, he said. I do prefer it. Charles Whitman pled guilty, 6 weeks later on a Thursday morning, to 3 counts of fraud and 1 count of conspiracy. The plea was quiet, no press conference, no dramatic courtroom moment. Just a brief appearance before a federal judge and a sentencing date set for 4 months out. Natalie was not charged. Her involvement had been limited to social cruelty rather than financial crime, which was its own kind of justice and its own kind of insufficiency. Isabella read the news on her phone in the Regent's restaurant kitchen, where her mother was explaining to the head chef exactly how long the bread pudding needed in the oven, and why the chef's suggestion of 25 minutes was both wrong and professionally embarrassing. 30, Patricia Hart said firmly. You rush it, it falls apart in the middle. The middle is the whole point. The chef, a 32-year-old named Dominic, who had trained in New York and considered himself broadly unimpressible, had been working with Patricia for 3 weeks, and had the expression of a man who has learned repeatedly and specifically that he was wrong about what he thought he knew. Yes, Ms. Hart, he said. Isabella put her phone away and looked at her mother. 63 years old, completely at home in a kitchen she had never been in before 3 weeks ago, talking about bread pudding with the authority of someone for whom the recipe was not a recipe, but a memory. Charles pled guilty, Isabella said. Patricia turned. She had known about Charles. Isabella had told her everything, which had produced a conversation of considerable emotional intensity at Patricia's kitchen table one Sunday afternoon. Patricia had listened to all of it without interrupting, and when Isabella finished, had said simply, I raised you to be better than the people who tried to make you small. I am glad you finally believed me. Good, Patricia said now. Just that word. Then she turned back to the bread pudding. The restaurant opened on a Saturday in March, 6 weeks and 2 days after Isabella had told the board it would, which she considered acceptable, given that she had simultaneously been managing an operational overhaul, cooperating with a federal investigation, and renegotiating a catering contract that the previous vendor had structured with the particular creativity of someone who expected no one to read the fine print. The opening was not a grand gala. Isabella had specifically resisted the suggestion of a splashy launch event, because splashy launch events were how you attracted people who wanted to be seen at an opening, rather than people who wanted to come back. She wanted people who came back. She had sent 100 handwritten invitations to a specific list, the Regent's entire staff and their families. Gerald and his wife of 31 years, who had met when Gerald was a night porter at a different hotel, and his wife had been the overnight desk clerk. The breakfast team member who had been stealing from the till and had spent 8 weeks paying it back in careful weekly amounts and had not once failed to show up for his shift. Dominic and his sous chef and the 2 line cooks who had been driving 40 minutes each way from their apartments because the Regent was the first kitchen they'd worked in where someone asked their opinion before changing the menu. Marcus and his teenage daughter, who was apparently considering culinary school, and had spent 2 Saturday afternoons in October watching Patricia cook with the focused attention of someone absorbing something important, and 100 other people. The businesses in the neighborhood. The hospital administrator, who had mentioned to Isabella in passing that the Regent used to host the annual fundraiser before the restaurant closed, the city council member whose district included the waterfront, and who had been asking careful questions about what the Bellacorte redevelopment actually meant for the people who lived there. Roman came. He came alone without his security detail in the visible configuration she had become accustomed to, and he sat at a corner table with a view of the open kitchen, and he ate bread pudding and did not check his phone for 2 hours, which Isabella suspected was a personal record. Patricia came to his table between the first and second course. Isabella watched from across the room too far to hear the conversation close enough to see her mother sit down across from Roman Bellacorte, with the complete comfort of someone who does not find powerful men intimidating because she has never learned to. Roman leaned forward when Patricia spoke. He stayed leaning forward. Whatever her mother was saying, he was listening to it, the way he listened to everything completely, without the partial attention of someone waiting for their turn. When Patricia came back to the kitchen, Isabella raised an eyebrow. He's a serious man, Patricia said, tying her apron. I know. Serious men make mistakes when they're afraid, and then they work very hard to correct them. Patricia looked at her daughter. He asked me if I thought you were happy here. Isabella stared. He asked you. I told him that you were happy, the way you are happy when you're doing something that matters, Patricia said. Which is not the same as easy, but is better than easy. She picked up a spoon. He said he understood the distinction. I believed him. She began stirring. He also said the bread pudding was the best he had eaten in 20 years. He might be flattering you. He might, Patricia agreed, unconcerned. But he had a second portion, and powerful men who are accustomed to lying don't tell unnecessary truths. Second portions are a truth. She glanced at Isabella. Go talk to him. You've been managing this room for 3 hours, and the room is managing itself. Isabella looked at the room. Patricia was right. It was running the way a room runs when it has been built correctly, with the momentum of its own warmth, guests talking to each other, rather than performing for the event staff, moving with the easy confidence of people who know their jobs and believe their jobs matter. She went to Roman's table. Your mother, he said when she sat down, is remarkable. She's been telling me that for 30 years, Isabella said. I recently started believing her. He looked at her, the full, direct quality of attention she had become accustomed to and still was not entirely used to. The room is good. The room is great, Isabella said. Don't undersell it. The room is great, he agreed. You built it. My mother's recipes built it. Dominic's technique built it. Gerald checking the reservation system 3 times this morning because he wanted tonight to go right built it. She looked around at the people she had assembled, the room that smelled like Patricia Hart's cooking and decades of effort, and something that had been missing from the Regent for 8 months and was now undeniably back. I just made sure everyone had what they needed to do their job. That's leadership, Roman said. That's management, Isabella said. Leadership is what happens when someone does something that matters and the right people notice. She paused. Marcus told me yesterday that 3 of the senior staff had turned down offers from other hotels in the past month. He wanted me to know. She looked at her hands on the table. 6 months ago, those people were watching and waiting. Now they're staying. She looked up. That matters more to me than the occupancy numbers. Roman was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been speaking with an executive recruiter. Isabella looked at him sharply. Not to replace you, he said immediately. To build a leadership team for the expanded hospitality division. The redevelopment agreement includes 2 additional properties, a boutique hotel in Old City, and a conference center on the waterfront. I need someone to lead the entire division. He looked at her steadily. I'm offering you the presidency of Bellacorte Hospitality, full authority over all 3 properties, reporting directly to an independent board, not to me. Compensation. He named a number. Isabella was very still. That number, she said carefully, is significantly above market. You're significantly above market, Roman said. I've spent 6 months watching what you do. I know what it's worth. The independent board, she said. Genuinely independent. Not your people with a different title. I'll give you 2 of the 3 seats. I name all 3. He looked at her. You're negotiating. I'm always negotiating, Isabella said. It's how I know what something is actually worth. She held his gaze. I name all 3 board members. The board has authority to override organizational decisions, including yours, if there is evidence of financial impropriety. That clause is in the contract language, not a side agreement. Roman was quiet for 4 seconds, she counted, because she remembered the last time she had counted his seconds of hesitation and what it had meant. Agreed, he said. And I want Hart's table included in the Bellacorte hospitality portfolio, Isabella said. Not as a property you own, as a partner business. My mother retains full ownership. Bellacorte provides the marketing infrastructure and the catering contract for the conference center. She provides the food. Roman looked at her. Something moved through his expression. Not surprise exactly, but something close to recognition. The face of someone who has just seen a move they should have anticipated and didn't, and respects the person who made it. Done, he said. I'll have my attorney review the full contract before I sign anything, Isabella said. Of course. She looked at him across the table. This man who had caught her falling 6 months ago and had not in all the time since attempted to decide where she landed. Who had let her negotiate every term name, every condition, set every boundary. Who had sat in a board meeting and given away territory and money and operational control, not because it was strategically advantageous, but because it was right. Roman, she said, Yes. The night at the Crown Meridian, when you pulled me onto your lap. She paused. I never told you that it embarrassed me. He was very still. I know. Not the catching. The catching was, she organized her thoughts. You saved me from a bad fall. I know that. But the sitting in front of everyone, not being able to stand right away, feeling... She stopped. I've spent my whole life managing how much space I take up. And suddenly, I was taking up someone else's space in front of 200 people, and I couldn't... I know, Roman said again. His voice was quiet. I've thought about it many times, that the act of catching you was mine to decide, and the act of holding you. He paused. I didn't think. I just held on. Because I was... He stopped, which was unusual for him. I was frightened. Isabella looked at him. You were frightened. The glass was very close, he said. And you were... He stopped again. He was not a man who struggled for words. She had learned that. So when he struggled, it meant something. I have not been frightened for another person's physical safety in a long time. I had forgotten what the reflex looks like from the outside. She sat with that for a moment. I forgave you for it a long time ago, she said. I just wanted you to know it existed to be forgiven. Thank you, Roman said, for saying it plainly. I said I was done choosing comfort over truth, she said. You did. He looked at her. The embarrassment you felt does it. He stopped. Is it present now when you're in this room? Isabella looked around the restaurant. At her mother's recipes on the walls in Patricia's handwriting. At Gerald's wife laughing at something Marcus had said. At Dominic watching the open kitchen with the proprietary satisfaction of someone who has made something worth being proud of. At the room she had built, that was running beautifully, that smelled like bread pudding, and 30 years of her family's work, and something new that had no name yet, but felt like the beginning of one. No, she said. It isn't. Roman's expression did something quiet and genuine. Good. 3 weeks after the restaurant opened, Natalie Whitman called. Isabella was in her office, the one with the window, which looked out over the part of Philadelphia that was depending on your perspective. Either the most complicated or the most interesting section of the city, when her assistant put through the call with the tone of someone who is uncertain whether they are doing the right thing. She said it was personal, the assistant said. Put her through, Isabella said. Natalie's voice on the phone was different than it had been in the ballroom. The social armor was absent, not stripped away dramatically, but simply not present, the way a room looks different when the furniture has been moved out. I know you have no reason to take this call, Natalie said. I took the call, Isabella said. A pause. My father's sentencing is in 3 weeks. I've been doing the court-ordered community service which I expected, but the attorney also said I should... She stopped. I'm saying this wrong. I've been practicing it and I'm still saying it wrong. Then stop practicing it and just say it, Isabella said. A long pause. What I did to you at the gala, Natalie said. Catching your heel. And before that, everything I said. The way I talked about your body in front of everyone. Her voice was unsteady in a way that didn't sound performed. I did it because I could. Because I had done it before, and nothing happened. Because my father's position meant I never had to think about consequences. A breath. And I did it because... She stopped. Because you were very good at your job and everyone in that room could see it. And I have never been very good at anything, and I am ashamed of what I did with that feeling. Isabella was quiet. I don't expect you to forgive me, Natalie said. I know what I did. I know what it cost you. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm calling because my attorney and my therapist and my own... She paused. My own conscience have been telling me for 6 months that I need to say it to you directly. Not in a courtroom. Not through a statement. A pause. So I'm saying it. Isabella looked out her window at the complicated, interesting section of Philadelphia below her. I accept your apology, she said. I want to be clear about what that means. It doesn't mean what happened was acceptable. It doesn't mean I'm pretending it didn't happen. It means I'm choosing not to carry it forward. She paused. What you did that night had real consequences. You know that. Yes, Natalie said quietly. The consequences aren't mine to remove, Isabella said. You'll work through them with the people who have authority over that. What I can tell you is that I don't need you to suffer to feel better about what I've built." She paused. "I built it anyway. That's enough." A long silence on the line. Natalie started. Stopped. "I don't know what I expected you to say, but not that." "Most people," Isabella said, "expect me to be smaller than I am. It's a persistent miscalculation." After she hung up, she sat at her desk for a moment. The window showed her the city going about its afternoon business, ordinary, complicated, continuous. She thought about 6 months ago, when she had been invisible by practice and invisible by other people's design, and she had believed those were the same thing. They were not the same thing. She understood that now with the full force of something learned rather than something told. Her phone buzzed. Roman. Board approved the old city property acquisition. Closing next month. You'll want to look at the operational timeline. She smiled. Typed back. Send me the files. And tell whoever drafted the vendor contracts that I'll be renegotiating 3 of the 4 before we sign. His response came in 30 seconds. I told them to expect that. They said they'd have the revised terms ready. Good, she typed. They're learning. She pulled up the old city property files. She had work to do, which was she had finally completely understood, not a burden she carried, but a thing she chose. Every morning, every decision, every renegotiated contract and retained employee and recipe written in her mother's handwriting on a restaurant wall. She chose it because it was hers, because she had stopped disappearing and found on the other side of that stopping something larger and more solid than anything invisibility had ever offered her. Outside Philadelphia moved and breathed and went about the irreducible complexity of being itself. Isabella Hart opened the files and began to read. The dress was deep red, not the careful strategic red of someone making a point, not armor, not performance. Just the color that Patricia Hart had held up in the small boutique on Walnut Street 3 weeks ago and said simply, "This one," with the certainty of a woman who has spent 63 years understanding what her daughter needs before her daughter does. Isabella had worn it without argument. She was getting better at that, at receiving things without immediately calculating whether she deserved them. 1 year. 1 year since a broken champagne glass and a deliberate trip and 200 people holding their breath in a ballroom while the most feared man in Philadelphia refused to let her fall. 1 year since she had walked to a table she had no business walking to and said what she knew because it needed to be said. 1 year since she had stopped practicing invisibility and discovered on the other side of that stopping that the space she occupied had always been exactly the right size. The Founders Relief Gala looked different this year. Same ballroom, same crystal, same orchestra tuning in the corner, but different in the way that places are different when the people who fill them have changed. This year's gala funded legal assistance for exploited hospitality workers and small businesses, rebuilding after extortion, which had been Isabella's proposal and the board's unanimous approval. She had written the funding criteria herself. She had also personally reviewed the vendor contracts, renegotiated the catering agreement, and restructured the event timeline to reduce overtime costs by 18%, because some habits were not habits, but simply who she was. Marcus found her in the service corridor at 6:55, which was where she always stood during initial seating, because the corridor was where you saw everything that mattered. "You look good," he said. "I look like myself," Isabella said, which took longer than it should have. "Same thing," Marcus said. "Table arrangements are confirmed. Your mother's team has the restaurant side running at capacity. The keynote is, Marcus." She looked at him. "I know. Go enjoy the first 30 minutes. You've earned it." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who is still adjusting to a version of work that includes being told to enjoy himself. "Gerald is covering the floor." "I know. Go." I went. Isabella stood in the corridor and breathed, which was something she had learned to do this year, to take 30 seconds before the work began, and simply exist in them without managing anything or anyone. She thought about the woman who had stood in this same corridor 1 year ago. shifting her weight off a sprained ankle, holding a portfolio that contained 14 months of quiet documentation, deciding whether she was brave enough to walk to the right table. She had been brave enough. She had not known it yet, but she had been brave enough. She walked into the ballroom. The first person to speak to her was the regent's head of catering, who needed a decision about the third course timing. She made the decision in 45 seconds. The second person was Gerald, who reported that the Northwest speaker cluster had a slight feedback issue. She had him radio the audio team before he finished the sentence. The third person was Dominic, who had come from the restaurant side to tell her that the bread pudding was gone fully consumed before the second seating, and did she want him to run a second batch? Yes, she said. Tell my mother she was right about the quantity. Don't tell her I said it like that. She'll know anyway, Dominic said. She always does. Isabella agreed. She moved through the ballroom with the particular ease of someone who has spent a year rebuilding her relationship with the space she occupies. Not performance ease. The difference was something you felt rather than saw, but it was real, and the staff felt it, and the guests who encountered her felt it, and the room was better for it in the indefinable way that rooms are better when the person running them is not afraid. At 7:40 a man she didn't recognize stopped her near the east side of the dining floor. He was mid-60s, well-dressed, with the comfortable authority of significant money and the particular obliviousness that sometimes comes with it. You there, he said. Isabella stopped. I need a champagne refill, and the one you have on the tables is frankly, it's not what I'd expect at an event at this level. Can you find me something better? He held out his glass without looking at her directly. And the seating at table 11 is wrong. I requested window adjacent, and it's not what I requested. Isabella looked at him for one full second. Then she excused herself, walked to the podium where the evening's program materials were arranged, picked up the microphone that was sitting ready for the keynote, and tapped it once. The ballroom quieted. Not all at once the way a large room quiets when something has shifted. Conversation dropping in stages like dominoes finding their moment. Good evening, Isabella said. I'm Isabella Hart, president and co-owner of Bellacorte Hospitality. Welcome to the second annual Founders Relief Gala. Tonight's event benefits the Philadelphia Hospitality Worker Legal Fund, which has provided assistance to over 300 workers in the past year, who were exploited by employers who believed those workers had no recourse. She paused just briefly. They were wrong about that. People with recourse tend to use it when someone makes sure they have it. She set the microphone down. The man with the champagne glass had gone the color of old putty. From across the ballroom, she felt, rather than saw, Roman. The particular quality of his attention, the way it registered before she located its source. She found him at table 1, which was where he always sat, and he was looking at her with an expression that was not pride exactly, but was something adjacent to it, and deeper than it. The face of someone watching another person be completely exactly themselves, and understanding that he is witnessing something that cannot be manufactured. He did not stand up. He did not intervene. He did not do anything except watch her command the room she had built in the dress her mother had chosen on her own terms. She returned to the man with the champagne glass. She gave him the name of the sommelier who would help with the champagne. She told him that the seating had been arranged according to the confirmed requests submitted before the event, and that if his request hadn't been transmitted correctly, the event's coordinator at the registration table could review it with him. She said all of this pleasantly and with complete neutrality, and she did not apologize, and she did not make herself smaller, and he did not ask her to do either. She moved on. She had work to do. At 9:15 the keynote concluded, and the ballroom moved into the slower social rhythm of the evening's second half, the part where the event became the conversation, and the conversation was the real point. Isabella made her rounds with the particular efficiency of someone who has learned that genuine connection is more effective than performed warmth, and the distinction shows. She was crossing toward the service corridor when Natalie Whitman stepped into her path. This was the first time they had been in the same room since the call 3 weeks ago. Natalie was here as part of her court-ordered community service. She had been assigned to assist with event coordination for the gala's charitable component, which Isabella had not arranged, and which had required when she found out a private 10-minute conversation with herself about what she actually believed regarding consequences and forward motion. She had decided she believed it. You didn't get to choose when your beliefs were tested, only whether you held them. Natalie looked different in person than she had sounded on the phone, younger somehow and less armored. The social fluency that had made her cruelty so casual a year ago was present but quieter, like a skill being deliberately held back. "Ms. Hart," she said. "Isabella," Isabella said. A small pause. Natalie absorbed this. "Isabella, the coordination team has the silent auction running. I wanted to say in person that this event is..." She stopped. "You built something real here. I can see that. I wanted you to know I can see it." Isabella looked at her for a moment. "Thank you for being here tonight. I mean that without subtext." Natalie nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something else and had decided against it, which was its own kind of growth. She moved back toward the coordination area. Isabella watched her go and thought about the specific arithmetic of damage and repair. How they never balance perfectly. How repair doesn't erase damage, but exists alongside it, and how the only choice available is whether to keep working or stop. She had chosen to keep working. She was going to keep choosing it. Roman was at the private table at the back of the ballroom when she found him at 10:30, the same table where 1 year ago she had sat across from him with a portfolio and 14 months of documentation, and the first truly free decision she had made in 6 years. He was alone. His security team was present, but invisible, which she had learned was how Roman preferred it, when he was not performing the version of himself that his professional world required. "Effective keynote," he said when she sat down. "I had 30 seconds of material," Isabella said. "The champagne man gave me the opening. He left at 9 o'clock. Good. The sommelier probably tried to help him, and he realized he didn't actually know anything about champagne." She paused. "Or he was embarrassed. Either outcome is fine." Roman looked at her, that full direct attention that she had stopped trying to deflect, and had started somewhere in the past 6 months, simply receiving. It was a different kind of thing receiving attention from someone who offered it without conditions. It had taken time to learn that the absence of conditions was real and not a strategy. "The old city property closes Tuesday," he said. "I know. I have the operational timeline drafted. The staff transition plan is..." "Isabella." His voice was quiet. She stopped. "The hotel can wait until Wednesday," he said. She looked at him. "You're telling me to stop working." "I'm telling you the work will be there," Roman said. He didn't finish the sentence with words. He gestured slightly at the table between them, at the two of them sitting in the particular quiet of the ballroom's back corner, while 300 people moved through the room they had built together. "This is also real. It also requires presence." She was quiet for a moment. "I know." "Do you?" "I'm getting better at it," she said. "Presence without management. Being in a place without running it." She looked at her hands on the table. "It's harder than running things." "Why?" "Because when I'm running things, I know what I'm for," Isabella said. "When I stop running things, I have to know what I am." She paused. That took longer to learn. Roman was quiet for a moment. Then, "I have something to say to you. I've been deciding how to say it for approximately 3 months. "Then stop deciding and just say it," Isabella said. "It always works better that way." He looked at her. The particular quality of stillness that settled over him was different from his professional stillness, deeper with something unguarded at the center of it. "I want to ask you something," he said. "And I want to ask it correctly, which means I need you to understand what I'm asking and what I'm not asking." He paused. "I'm not asking you to belong to me. I'm not asking you to make yourself smaller, or to arrange your life around mine, or to accept that what I represent is more important than what you've built." He looked at her directly. "I'm asking whether you want to build the next part alongside me, as a partner, in every sense of the word." Isabella looked at him for a long moment. "That's a proposal," she said. "Yes," Roman said. "You're proposing in the back corner of a ballroom during an event I'm running." "You said presence without management," Roman said. "I'm present. The event is running itself." A pause. "And I've learned from watching you for a year that you're most yourself when you're working so." "So you propose during the work," Isabella said. It seemed accurate to who we are, Roman said. She looked at him. This man who had caught her falling and had not in all the time since attempted to decide where she landed. Who had learned slowly and imperfectly, and at real cost, to offer instead of command. Who sat on floors reading invoices at 3 in the morning and ate second portions of bread pudding and had a conversation with her mother that lasted 45 minutes and had never once told Isabella what to feel about any of it. "I have conditions," she said. Something moved across his face. Relief, she thought that she was negotiating rather than refusing, and something warmer than relief underneath it. "Of course you do." "Our marriage does not change my authority at Bellacorte Hospitality," Isabella said. "The independent board structure stays exactly as negotiated. My decisions are mine." "Agreed." "Hart's table remains my mother's. The partnership agreement doesn't change." "Agreed." "And if there is ever a moment where you hesitate—" She paused, not for effect, but because the words still carried weight, even now. "For 4 seconds, when someone questions my integrity, or my judgment, or my right to be in a room, I need you to know that I will address it myself, and I will not wait for you to defend me." "I know," Roman said. "I'd be insulted if you did." She looked at him. "Then yes." The word landed, simply the way true things do, without drama, without the performed emotion of a scene designed for an audience. Just yes in the back corner of a ballroom at 10:30 at night, with the orchestra playing something slow and the bread pudding gone, and 300 people in the room that they had built. Roman reached across the table and took her hand. Not a performance, a fact. His hand over hers, warm and certain, and not going anywhere. "My captains," he said, "are going to have opinions." "Your captains," Isabella said, "have been having opinions for a year. They'll manage." "DeSanto will want to make a toast." "DeSanto can make a toast. He's earned it." She paused. "He's been eating at the Regent every Thursday for 6 months. He always orders the bread pudding second." "He told me," Roman said. "He said your mother's cooking reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen." "She has that effect on people," Isabella said. "It's why the restaurant works. You can't manufacture that. You can only make sure it has enough room to be itself." Roman looked at her. The thing in his expression was not contained anymore. It was simply there, the face of a man who has spent a long time in rooms where everything had a price and has found late, and improbably something that doesn't. "You gave me room to be different from what I was," he said. "You did the work," Isabella said. "I just didn't leave when it got complicated." "That mattered more than you know." "I know exactly how much it mattered," Isabella said. "That's why I stayed." At 11 o'clock the Founders Relief Gala began its final hour, and Isabella Hart moved back through the ballroom, through the room she had built. The event she had designed, the organization she had taken from 44% occupancy to a waiting list for event bookings, the charity that had protected 300 workers in the past 12 months, the restaurant that was serving her mother's bread pudding to DeSanto at a corner table while his wife held his hand across from him. She moved through it without disappearing, without managing her size or her presence or the space she occupied, without the careful years-long calculation of how much of herself was too much. She wore deep red, and she was exactly herself, and the room made room for her, the way rooms do, when the person in them has finally completely stopped apologizing for being in them. Roman watched from the private table. He did not follow her. He did not manage the room around her or position himself to reflect power in her direction. He simply watched with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has learned the difference between protecting someone and trusting them, and has chosen trust. Gerald found Isabella near the service corridor at 11:45. He had worked the floor all evening with the unhurried competence of a man in his 19th year at a hotel that had finally become worth staying in. He looked at her with the evaluative expression she had learned to read accurately. Not suspicion, but the careful measure of someone who gives his regard slowly and means it completely when he gives it. "Good night," he said. Not a question. A verdict. "Good night," Isabella agreed. He nodded once and went back to work. High praise from Gerald. At midnight, when the final guests were moving toward the exits and the staff had begun the quiet, practiced work of an event's conclusion, Isabella stood at the edge of the ballroom floor and looked at what remained. The cleared tables, the folded linens, the easy tiredness of people who had done good work and knew it. Roman came to stand beside her. Not touching, just present in the particular way she had come to recognize as his specific version of closeness. "Ready," he said. She looked at the room one more time. At the event she had run. At the organization she had built. At the proof sitting in every successfully cleared table, and every retained employee, and every hospitality worker whose legal costs had been covered this year, that the work had been worth doing, and that she had been exactly the right person to do it. "Yes," Isabella Hart said. She had entered this ballroom 1 year ago, believing that survival required invisibility. She left it knowing that the most powerful thing she had ever done was simply refuse to disappear, and that everything worth having in her life had been waiting on the other side of that refusal, patient and solid and entirely finally